Hello everyone, this is Anna from Expat Realty, and today I'm here to talk to you about mortgages and banks in Portugal. So for those of you who don't know, Expat Realty is a relocation and investment agency that helps expats settle in Portugal from a lifestyle perspective. We are a team of locals that helps you figure out where is the right place in all of continental Portugal according to your budget and lifestyle needs. Our goal is also to do things sustainable in a way that doesn't rise prices and is beneficial for both expats and locals. We have all of our information listed very transparently in our website in www.savvycatrealty.com, and we work with both rentals and purchases, so feel free to check everything there. So going into today's topic, which is mortgages and banks in Portugal. So the first thing I would like to mention is that the bank processes have been tightening up very significantly over the past 2 or 3 years. To start, it was actually very easy to open a bank account in Portugal, even remotely, but banks have been becoming more and more demanding, especially with citizens from outside of the European Union. A lot of banks will be a lot more lenient and a lot easier when it comes for those of you who have European Union citizenship. But for international citizens, unless you are working with a company that already has contacts in the bank, you will probably have to go to the bank directly and provide all of the documentation. And currently there are some banks that require the documents to be apostilled, which means that they have to be translated and recognized at the embassies. Not all of the banks do this, but it's starting to be a requirement in some places, and there are also some nationalities that are becoming flagged, so do keep that in mind when looking to open a bank account in Portugal. Also keep in mind that it's actually mandatory to have a bank account in Portugal in order to get your visa. It tends to be a requirement in most visas to have your bank account, so the fact that the opening itself is being made more difficult is a bit of a loophole situation. So going into mortgages and what you need or and should be aware here in Portugal. The first thing that I would like to clear up is a few common concerns and common questions I see. The first one is that you do not actually have to have a residency permit or any kind of visa to get a mortgage in Portugal. You actually can do it as a fully international citizen, and the same thing comes for purchase. You can purchase a property without being a citizen at all. You do have to have a European NIF number, a Portuguese NIF number, which is the fiscal identification here in Portugal, and that is mandatory in order to get any kind of official contract done in Portugal, and that is something that you obtain through finances, and as someone from outside the European Union, you will need a legal representation, a fiscal representative. So in order to do that, you may want to work with a company such as ourselves. Our packages include support in all of this, so in opening the bank account, getting the NIF number, dealing with the banks, getting all of your documents in order, and also support with the mortgages. So we pretty much offer all-in-one package. But like I said, when it comes to mortgages, you do not have to have the residency or citizenship first at all. You can buy anytime, even being a foreigner and even applying for a mortgage. So the standard here in Portugal is that banks will give up to 90%. However, for foreign citizens, they tend to be a bit more wary and rarely give more than 80% unless the property is highly overvalued. And so do keep that in mind when you are looking at purchasing with a mortgage. Also keep in mind that the mortgages do not cover the cost of taxes in Portugal. And there are three main costs that you will always have when buying a property. The first one is the EMT tax. The EMT tax is the transaction tax that you always pay at the moment that the property is registered, a change of ownership, and that is the deed. And this tax goes up to 5% of the property value. It can be less depending on the value of the property and whether it's residential or second house. If you are buying without having a residency permit, it will mandatorily be second house. So all of these things are things that you need to be aware and need to have the cash out of pocket to cover. So the EMT and the stamp tax. The stamp tax is a lot friendlier as it is just 0.8% of the property value. And then you have the cost of the deed itself. When you are going through a mortgage, the banks are always involved. They need to be present at the deed. So they are often the ones that choose the notary, and it's very common for the deed itself to be made in either a notary recognized by the bank or the bank itself if it is one of the major headquarters. And in this case, sometimes the cost of the deed will be included in your mortgage, but in most cases you will have to pay for the deed separately. And the deed can cost anywhere between 600 and 2,000 euros, depending on the value of the property, location, and so forth. When it comes to also loaning and having a mortgage in Portugal, it's also important to note that there is an age restriction. The mortgage has to be over by the time that the youngest contractor is 75 years old. So if you are applying as a couple and we have an age difference, it applies to the youngest person. If you are applying alone, then it's just to you. It's also important to know that when applying as a couple, both of your incomes will be taken into consideration. And the standard here in Portugal is that it is calculated something called an effort rate. And the effort rate is what will determine whether or not you are viable for this loan. So in order to get a loan in Portugal, your effort rate has to be under 30%. And what does this mean? It means that the monthly installment of this mortgage has to be under 30% of the income of the people who are applying for this mortgage. So if it's a single person, it's just the income of that person. And if it is a couple or two people, then it is the combined income of these people. And they will also take into account if you have any other major expenses, like if you have other loans and so on. They will ask you for documentation over the past few months of your main bank accounts and also proof of where your money is coming from in order to make this analysis. So if they see that there is money coming out every month, that will also be taken into account on the effort rate. So that is the main things that will determine on whether or not you will have a mortgage approved in Portugal. And the lower the effort rate is for you, the more the bank will like you and the more it is likely that they will lend you money. Another thing that is important to note in the way that banks operate and mortgage operates here in Portugal is that the amount of the loan is always dependent on the evaluation of the property. There are some countries like the US where you have a pre-approved credit depending on your credit score. In Portugal, you do not have a credit score. So the way that things operate is always on a case-by-case scenario depending on the evaluation of said property. So let's imagine that you will buy a property for 250,000 euros. The property, then once you ask the bank for the loan, they will send someone to evaluate this property, a professional of course, And let's say that the property is evaluated over the amount you are getting. So if you are paying 250,000 euros for it, it gets evaluated, let's say, at 270,000 euros. The amount the bank will lend you will be based on those 270,000 euros. So when this happens, you end up being able to ask for more money from the bank. However, if the property ends up being less, evaluated less than the amount you are buying, so let's say 250, and you are buying for, it is evaluated at 230, then in that case, the bank will loan you based on the 230, so you will have to cover that extra amount that they will not lend to you. So this is, of course, something very important. The evaluation is paid by you. It usually tends to be between 200 and 400 euros, and the bank will request that amount for you in order to do the evaluation. It's also important to take into consideration that when there are bank loans involved, the period until you can actually move into the house tends to be a bit longer. When you are a cash buyer that doesn't need a loan, the whole process is a lot faster. So the first step tends to be the promise contract, and then as long as all the documentation and everything is ready, you can move on to the deeds almost right away. While when there is a loan, all of these things need to be taken care of, and the banks in Portugal aren't exactly known to be very fast. So generally, when there are loans involved, we always consider a 3-month period between the promise and the deed, which is another reason why the cash buyers are often preferred, is because this becomes a faster process, and there is, of course, no risk of rejections. So going back into the banks and how things work. So generally, in our personal experience, we very rarely have properties that get evaluated under the amount the clients are paying for. I think the most we had was 10,000 on a 4,000 something property. So this is also because of the way we work. Our goal is to avoid properties that are inflated. So in most cases, the properties that our clients get tend to be evaluated around the same amount or often more. So that is another thing that is we try to align with our own values, as we do not want to inflate the market. And once all of this is done, like I said, you will have this longer period, and then the deed, and then everything goes smoothly from there. Once again, you don't actually need to have a residency permit in order to do all of this process, whether it is to buy cash or buy with a loan. You do, however, need to provide all of the documentation to the bank and need to be a bit patient, as things in Portugal tend to be a bit slow. Another thing that I would like to leave a warning in this video that we often have an issue with here in Portugal is that because of international transactions, this is another thing that is important, is that it's actually much preferred that you pay a property, even if you are buying cash. It is much preferred that you pay a property using a Portuguese or European Union bank account, because the Portuguese and European Union banks comply with the money laundering laws that are here in Portugal. While if you make a transference from outside of the European Union, especially of a big amount, you can get flagged for capital laundering evaluation. And that may get your money stuck for a long period of time. I had a client that did this and had his money stuck for over a month, and we're talking about a fairly high amount of money. So this is, of course, something that you would like to avoid. Another thing that is important to consider is that when you are transferring from a different currency, you always need to take into account the currency exchange. I personally would recommend to work with a currency exchange company in order to move the money to Portugal and to the Portugal bank account. We have our own partner that helps our clients do this, and since we work with a lot of large amounts, we always try to get partners that have actual humans helping people with each transaction. And our partner, I know that they often move the money first to a local bank account that belongs to the company and then move the money to your own account. And you can also actually secure rates at earlier stages with a number of exchange companies. So that is also something that you should always take into account and prepare when making big purchases and moving money internationally. Another thing that is very, very important to take care into consideration is that when you make international transfers between banks, there are generally significant fees. And generally, when you are making this transfer, you will have an option saying whether you want to pay those fees or charge those fees to the receiver. Never charge those fees to the receiver, because that will be seen very poorly. And generally, we had a number of situations of this happening in which transactions got hold up because of like 15-30 euro fees that the bank were charging for the international transfer. And of course, the sellers or owners were not willing to pay for this fees that truly had nothing to do with them, as they are not responsible for your bank account being international. So always take that into consideration and choose the option in which you pay for the fees yourself. Otherwise, you are putting yourself in more trouble and creating friction with the person that you are trying to make business with. So I believe this covers most of the things I wanted to talk to about banks. Then the only other note is, like I mentioned, banks in Portugal tend to be very slow, and it tends to be very hard to be in touch with them. Even we who have contacts in banks and already do a bunch of transactions, we often have to be running after them in order to do things. And in general, you cannot expect banks to actually follow through. You actually have to constantly be on top of them in order for things to be done. And you have to be very careful here in Portugal about forgetting things, because they are terrible at notifying you. And if for some reason they charge you something and your account was negative, or they charge you a service, they will only send you notifications within the app, and often not even notifications, just PDFs. And you are the one who has to be on top of things. Otherwise, they will be charging you ridiculous fees if you are not paying attention. So yes, overall, be careful with banks. Try to, it's always better to have someone on your side and someone improving the communication, because without that, the bank process can be fairly slow. So I hope that this was useful. I believe I covered most of the information needed for mortgages and dealing with banks in Portugal. We are here every week with information about Portugal, cities, processes, and a lot of things you may need while moving or living here. So if you find this useful, do subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. We also have a blog post with a lot of useful information in www.savvycatrealty.com. And of course, if you want to reach out to us and work with us directly, feel free to do so at contact@savvycatrealty.com. So I hope this was useful, and I hope to see you all again next week. Bye.